North Korea's economic disaster. How a nation smaller than Beverly Hills threatens the world. North Korea's economic disaster, the failed state behind the missiles. When we talk about North Korea, what comes to mind? Nuclear threats, military parades, and an isolated dictatorship cutting its people off from the outside world. But behind the missiles and propaganda lies something the regime is desperately trying to hide. An economy so pathetically small that it would be laughable if it weren't causing such immense suffering. Imagine this. North Korea's entire economy is smaller than Beverly Hills. Not Los Angeles, just Beverly Hills. A single neighborhood in California has a bigger economic output than this entire nation of 25 million people. North Korea's estimated GDP sits around 25 billion, though it's nearly impossible to calculate precisely because the country is so secretive and their currency, the won, is practically worthless internationally. For comparison, South Korea's economy is over 60 times larger, despite starting from identical conditions after the Korean War. How did things go so catastrophically wrong? That's what we're diving into today. The promising beginning that fooled everyone. When the Korean War ended in 1953, the peninsula was divided at the 38th parallel. Capitalist South Korea backed by America, Communist North Korea supported by China and the Soviet Union. Surprisingly, North Korea initially surged ahead. With abundant natural resources and generous support from its communist allies, North Korea rebuilt quickly and implemented ambitious 5-year economic plans. They constructed ports, built factories, and focused on rapid industrialization. For a brief moment in history, North Korea looked like it might outpace its southern neighbor. The Soviet Union and China pumped in technical expertise, machinery, and financial support. In exchange, they received North Korea's natural resources and another communist ally in the ideological battle of the Cold War. When the dream started crumbling. By the mid-1960s, cracks began appearing in North Korea's economic miracle. As the country aligned more closely with China, Soviet support dwindled. Their ambitious 7-year industrialization plan started missing targets. Meanwhile, paranoia about the West and South Korea drove the regime to channel massive resources into its military, as much as 25% of their budget. Unlike the United States, where military spending represents about 3.2% of GDP, with state governments handling education and infrastructure, North Korea's centrally planned economy meant military spending consumed roughly 20% of their entire economic output. The result? While building weapons, they neglected critical infrastructure, agriculture, and trade relationships. Then, in 1965, a shocking development. South Korea's growth rate exceeded North Korea's for the first time. The capitalist South had found its economic footing, while the North was starting to stumble. The economic collapse. By the late 1970s, North Korea was drowning in debt, desperately trying to maintain its ambitious plans. The inevitable crash came in 1980 when they defaulted on international loans, immediately cutting off their ability to borrow more money to stay afloat. A devastating drought hit around the same time, pushing an already fragile system to the brink. Throughout the 1980s, North Korea survived mainly on handouts from China and the Soviet Union, who continued supporting their failing ally partly to access North Korea's resources, but also to save face and prove communism could work. Then came the knockout blow. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and North Korea's biggest economic lifeline vanished overnight. 2 years later, the regime announced a new 3-year plan focused on agriculture, light industry, and foreign trade. It sounded promising, but failed spectacularly. Without Soviet fertilizer, crop yields plummeted. Trade agreements collapsed under the weight of their terrible credit rating and inability to produce competitive goods. North Korea had entered a death spiral. Unable to produce machinery domestically due to lack of expertise, they couldn't import it either, because nobody wanted to do business with them. For a small economy, this trade isolation was essentially a death sentence. the unthinkable, flirting with capitalism. By 2009, the situation was so desperate that North Korea began experimenting with the very thing its ideology was built on opposing: private enterprise. In their uniquely North Korean way, they allowed limited entrepreneurship between 2009 and 2013. By 2016, state enterprises could sell 50 to 80% of their output at market-based prices after giving the government its cut. The 2014 Enterprise Act even allowed state-owned managers to engage in foreign trade, form joint ventures, and accept non-government investments. Enterprise directors began functioning more like Western CEOs and could personally benefit from running efficient operations. But these half measures were too little, too late, implemented with the characteristic paranoia and control that prevents true economic growth. Today's bleak reality. Today, North Korea's economy isn't just stagnant, it's actively shrinking. Their increasing military provocations have triggered more international sanctions, further strangling their already gasping economy. The contrast with South Korea couldn't be more striking. Both nations started from identical positions after the war in 1953. South Korea actually had fewer natural resources and no land connection to powerful allies like China. They didn't receive the endless extensions on foreign aid that North Korea did. Yet South Korea embraced market economics, private enterprise, and invested in productive infrastructure. The result? They transformed from one of the world's poorest countries into an economic powerhouse, all while living next to a hostile neighbor threatening them with nuclear weapons. The future of North Korea. What lies ahead for North Korea? The government seems trapped in a cynical cycle, ramping up military aggression to scare the world, then dialing it back in exchange for foreign aid like a screaming child in a supermarket who gets a lollipop just to quiet down. As long as this strategy keeps working, they'll likely continue it. Meanwhile, the North Korean people suffer immense poverty, with widespread malnutrition and lack of basic services, all while the regime pours resources into weapons programs and luxury goods for the elite. The world watches and waits, hoping that someday this failing system will peacefully transform into something that actually serves its people rather than oppressing them. Until then, North Korea remains the ultimate cautionary tale, a nation that sacrificed its economic future on the altar of militarism and ideological rigidity, choosing weapons over prosperity and isolation over opportunity. Subscribe to my channel, leaving a like so that other people can have access to this video. Thank you.